That's when I say, to me, this smacks of the Eagles trying to drum up interest for Carson Wentz rather than others racing to the phone and saying, we need this guy.
You're listening to the JAKIB Media Sports Network in partnership with AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. Subscribe to the JAKIB Media channel on YouTube for access to all daily sports content.
All right, welcome back to The Fix, AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio, live in the Prop Swap studios. And it's time. And we have to get John up to speed here with my rant to start the show, but John McMullen joins us every night at 7:30 on The Fix for your nightly football fix. Follow John at JF McMullen on Twitter. PhillyVoice.com, SI.com is where you can find all of John's written work, and host of Extending the Play every Saturday, 10 a.m. to 11. John has a good show lined up this Saturday. Colin Thompson, tight end for the Carolina Panthers, will join John to talk about the Super Bowl and much more. So let's get John started here. J Mac, how are we doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm interested in this rant. I like a good rant.
Yeah, I mean, good news and bad news. Bad news, it's really nothing new. But, John, we cannot avoid this story and this conversation if our lives depended on it. And, of course, another report today from Ian Rappaport, and I don't really understand the report. To paraphrase it, the Eagles are taking calls, and they're not looking to trade Carson Wentz, but they're not hanging up the phone either. Okay. Like, before I tell you what my rant was about, and it was about that report, really, but fill us in on what all that means.
Well, it does mean the Eagles are open to trading Carson Wentz, which I think is a little bit of a shift, and I think it has to do with Carson not being malleable at this point and pretty much wanting out of the organization. And I think, if you go through sort of the stages of grief, I think you can compare it to what the Eagles are doing at this point. And I think we're getting toward acceptance and the realization that it isn't going to work. And we got to do the best we can to move on from this and head in a different direction. And I think that's what you kind of saw today. The Eagles floating these rumors that people are calling them. I don't know why people would be calling them. I don't think there's going to be a lot of interest in this particular quarterback coming in these circumstances. And I think the Eagles are trying to drum up some interest. And probably the biggest part of it is it's probably an indication that Howie Roseman has been given the okay from Jeffrey Lurie to eat that money that we talked about so much, the $33.8 million, which is significant. Because that's a big matzo ball, as Jerry Seinfeld would say. I said that on Rich's show. I'll say it on your show. That would spike the record from $22.2 million to $33.8. But I think the Eagles kind of understand this is not salvageable at this point.
And I want to get your thoughts in a minute about who could potentially be calling the Eagles, what it would take to trade him, what they could potentially get in return. But I said this earlier, and this is nothing really new, but just to put an exclamation point on it, exclamation mark, the fact that Carson has been as silent as he's been, to me, says a lot. Because if you view yourself how he views himself, the starting franchise quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles or any team in the NFL, you don't say thank you for everything. It was a rocky road towards the end. We didn't always see eye to eye. 4 years with Doug Peterson, nothing. New coach that you are assumed to be working with now moving forward, nothing. And I know it's not a huge deal, right? Like, who cares if he didn't tweet something? But to me, it is a big deal, and it says a lot. And I know you touched on this. I'm stealing it a little bit from you. But just to touch on that again with more information we have tonight.
Well, yeah, I think it's a big deal because of the prior relationship that Carson has had with the organization. And when he was in good stead and he was happy, as I said, he was a welcome guy. He was a welcome guy on Twitter. If you were a free agent, if you were a draft choice, if you were a coach, he was going to welcome you to Philadelphia, welcome you to the organization, welcome you to the Eagles. So it is a little bit indicative of where he is and the assumption that he wants to move on, in the fact that he has stayed radio silent when the new coach was hired, because he doesn't want to be here. He doesn't think he's going to be working with Nick Sirianni, or he certainly doesn't want to work with Nick Sirianni. He wants to work with a new organization, a new team, and a different coaching staff, and I think you'll get back to welcome Carson on Twitter, just in a different city. So I mean, it's not certainly scientific, but and that's why I brought it up. I mean, you can go look at his history. He welcomed everybody here, and he welcomed everybody here as the face of the franchise. He no longer wants to be that, so he's no longer welcoming people.
So who could be potentially on the other side of these calls that the Eagles aren't hanging up on? What are some teams?
Well, I mean, everybody focuses on Indianapolis first, and understandably so. I mean, they need a quarterback, number one. Frank Reich is there, number two. Press Taylor's there. People don't realize that. That's number three. Mike Rowe is there as well, although he and Carson didn't have as great a relationship. He's there as well. So that's sort of Philadelphia West, if you want to look at Philadelphia being Indianapolis East. So obviously he's very familiar with a number of people on that coaching staff. That team thinks it's a Super Bowl contender if they can get a capable quarterback, and they have plenty of money to pay Carson his salary, plenty of cap space from that perspective. So I think that's the natural spot everyone looks at. But again, just because Frank Reich had some success with Carson in 2017 before all the injuries, that doesn't mean he can't watch tape from last season and see the regression and see all the issues. And you have to see, one of the things I think that was notable about that report from Ian and Mike Garafolo was that they kind of claim that there's no more veteran quarterbacks available. I don't think that's true. Now, they might not be available yet, but you've heard the rumors of whether it's Derek Carr. You don't even have to get into the Deshaun Watsons of the world or Aaron Rodgers. Certainly Houston would not give Deshaun Watson in any circumstance in Indianapolis in their own division. But, even guys like Jimmy Garoppolo and players like that, and they might be looked at as better options than Carson Wentz right now. So that's when I say, to me, this smacks of the Eagles trying to drum up interest for Carson Wentz rather than others racing to the phone and saying, we need this guy. That's how I take this.
I saw earlier today as well that, while we're talking about Indy as a potential team that could be on the other side of the phones calling the Philadelphia Eagles, Andrew Luck coming out of retirement, and there is no credible source attached to this story, I guess we can call it, but I think it was thrown around on the Pat McAfee show earlier today. Do you think there's any possibility of Andrew Luck coming back and playing?
Well, I mean, he's certainly young enough to do it. He's certainly talented enough to do that. If he wanted to do it, that would slam the door shut on Carson Wentz in Indianapolis. No question about that. I mean, you never say never in this league. The reason he retired is because of all his injuries, and he was tired of the constant rehab, as he called it at the time. And was just tired of those processes. So as he's gotten further away from those injuries and he's healthy, I've always thought he's a guy that might revisit wanting to come back and play in the NFL, and we'll see. The thing about Andrew Luck is, though, he's a little bit different than most NFL players. He's got a lot of outside interest. We talk about Stanford guys. He really is a very smart person, and he has eclectic interests that go outside of football. So I don't know if he's coming back, but if he does come back, I mean, he's going to be the Indianapolis Colts quarterback. There's no question about that.
What other potential buyers for Carson Wentz could you see realistically? And you can also parlay that answer with what the Eagles could be getting in return and what they would have to give up besides Carson.
Well, I mean, there are a number of teams that need quarterbacks. San Francisco does not want to move forward with Jimmy Garoppolo. But again, there's always other avenues. Kyle Shanahan would prefer to get Kirk Cousins out of Minnesota. Can he do that? If he does that, I think you have a domino, and you have Jimmy Garoppolo going back to New England, which would be another team that needs a quarterback. And people will say potentially Carson Wentz. I think most of these teams all have preferred plans that do not include Carson Wentz, and that's the problem. Denver's another team, but they're not very good. They have a top 10 pick. If you look at, we always talk about contracts, cost-effective rookie quarterbacks. They could probably sit at number 9 and get a Trey Lance and have 5 years of a cost-effective rookie deal if they want to go that direction, as opposed to paying someone $25 million. John, which I think would be interesting if he wants to move on from Derek Carr, and I believe he does, because John Gruden is the epitome of the coach that always thinks the next thing is better than what he has, and he's usually wrong. Oakland, and 25 cents in the swear jar, Las Vegas Raiders are always in the equation because of John Gruden and because of his the way he does business. But I don't. There are so many options, and that's the problem the Eagles have. And when you talk about what they're going to get back, this is the biggest problem to a Carson Wentz trade. From all accounts, from all indications I get, the Eagles want value in return. Now, typically, they're not getting a first-round pick, but they probably want a second-round pick or something of that. They're not getting it. I mean, you never say never because there are dumb teams, there are organizations, but it's going to be really hard to generate anything for this particular player at this time with so many options. And I think you look at the Jared Goff trade for one reason. Now, not because of what the Rams gave up, because they were getting a significant asset in return. The Eagles wouldn't be looking for that. So that's not the reason. The reason why is the contract. They're basically identical, Goff and Carson Wentz. Now, Eagles fans can harp on what Carson did in 2017 and even 2018 and even 2019 and say he's better than Jared Goff, and I would have agreed with them. In 2020, I got news for you. He wasn't better than Jared Goff. Not even close. He was arguably the worst quarterback, the worst starting quarterback in the NFL. And that's, again, other teams watch film. They're not looking at 2017 Carson Wentz and saying, I'm paying for 2017 Carson Wentz. They're paying for 2020 Carson Wentz. So why I bring up Jared Goff is because of his contract, NBA-style trade, Major League Baseball-style trade, getting rid of a toxic asset until the Eagles get to that point. When the Eagles get to that point and understand this is a toxic asset, then they can move them pretty easily. They have to get to that point.
What's it going to take for them to get to that point? Because I don't know, how much more evidence they need, and what's it going to take? Just, a TO doing sit-ups in the driveway type of situation? I don't understand how much worse.
It has to do with the other teams, and it has nothing to do with Carson. Carson's not toxic because of the way he acts. Carson is toxic because of the way he played in his contract. People may misinterpret that word. That's, just the term people use when they talk about players that don't have a lot of value. And that's where Carson is right now. The Eagles are going through that process. That's what they started today by floating the story. And essentially, can we find that team that maybe makes a bad decision? And they have to March 19th. That's the drop-dead date, where they have to pay a $10 million roster bonus. They'll want to get it done by that point. Ultimately, I think if they trade him, it'll happen well before that. But nonetheless, I've said it a couple times now. There's two options that are going to happen here. They're either going to trade him, they're going to come to that realization and say, look, we're just not going to get a lot for this guy. We're going to take the medicine, and we're just going to move on and get to the Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts, and whoever maybe another quarterback might be and start that era. Or they're going to say, you know what, $33.8 million, a little bit too much. We're going to keep this guy for another year, and we're going to cut him next year. I think that would be a bad decision because you potentially stunt the development of Jalen Hurts. A lot of potential issues in the locker room and all that kind of thing. But where we are, this nonsense of reboot, rebuild, whatever you want to use, it's over. It's just a matter if it's over by this March or next March. That's it. That's the only question left.
Does how the team approach the offseason impact – does Carson Wentz being here impact how the team approaches the offseason?
Well, no. I mean, they'll have a baked-in plan, realizing they're gonna have a lot of sunk costs. They're gonna have a lot of money to pay Carson Wentz to either play for somebody else or probably sit on the bench here. That's kind of the Sophie's choice you have. So Howie's got to kind of build that into his plan as far as roster building goes. And, maybe that's why Jeffrey Lurie used the term transition 7 different times when he fired Doug Peterson. He kind of knows it's going to take a little bit of time to get out of this mess. And that's what happens when you make bad roster decisions. And they made a bad decision. But I don't criticize them for it because I don't think anybody thought they made a bad decision at the time. Sometimes it works out like this. And for whatever reason, the player went off the rails. You can blame whoever you want. People love blame. But, the best indication, the best way to move forward from a mistake, we all know, is to admit it. And, instead of keep playing into it, just rip off the Band-Aid and move forward.
Talking with John McMullen, our NFL Eagles insider. Follow J-Mac on Twitter at JFMcMullen, PhillyVoice.com, and SI.com. Some new articles are available, so make sure you go check out all of John's written work. John, the anniversary is today, 3 years ago today, as we're talking.
Amazing, isn't it?
It's nuts, man.
I'm writing about this right now, Ryan. 3 years. 3 years today. Doug Peterson last 35 months after winning a Super Bowl. And, I've said this numerous times on shows we've done. Just give me one, these fans have said. Just give me one before I die. And they got one, and all of a sudden he's not good enough 3 years later. And, I criticize fans for that, and I think rightfully so. I think it's absurd he's not the head coach of this team. I've been very honest about that. But obviously Jeffrey Lurie's a bigger issue. I mean, he can't be a fan. So, you are where you are. You think about Corey Clement, not that it matters, but he's obviously going to be gone. So if you think about the Philly special, Corey Clement, Trey Burton, Nick Foles, they're all gone. Carson is likely going this year. Zach Ertz is likely going. Who knows with guys like Brandon Brooks and Lane Johnson and Brandon Graham. But, we're going to get to this year, and there's probably going to be under 10 people. And, if that's the new normal, it's not a good normal. I'll tell you that.
It's just amazing. Like I was, seeing all the videos from after the game, Doug Peterson talking to the team, and just that was the peak of this franchise's entire existence. And literally just 3 short years later, we're in the middle of this storm. It's wild.
Yeah, and I blame Jeffrey Lurie for it because, again, he has to be above the emotion of it. And, look, it's a cyclical industry. I talk about it all the time. Players get old. You got to move on, and they're difficult decisions, especially when you've had success with particular players. But, when I think about the Eagles' mentality, and I mentioned him earlier in this call, Press Taylor is maybe exemplifies what I think is wrong with this front office, because Press was here originally with Chip Kelly, and it was the Eagles organization that tabbed him as a future star as a coach in this league, and they thought he was going to be a really innovative offensive mind, really smart guy, and then all of a sudden, Doug kind of takes him under his wing as his protege, and all of a sudden he's a dummy. Again, I'm not talking fans here. I'm talking organization. And they're using him as a scapegoat. And they were the same people telling me how smart this guy was and how capable he was and how good he's going to be. And then Doug takes an interest in him, and all of a sudden it changes it turns on a dime. Man, if you knew some of the stuff going on behind the scenes with this team, it is ugly. It is ugly. And I can't say this enough when I talk about it. And I have nothing against Nick Sirianni. I hope he's successful. I hope anybody's successful. But to give that guy carte blanche to hire his own coaching staff, and a guy who's standing up, and you're watching all those videos today as an Eagles fan, and who brought you what nobody else was able to bring this organization, and you throw him in the trash 35 months later. That is appalling. I don't know any other way to describe it.
No, couldn't agree with you anymore. It is appalling. It is, I mean, you can't write this stuff. You can't make this stuff up. And last thing here, and we've had a million variations of this conversation, but looking back on it, Carson Wentz on the sideline, Nick Foles leading the team to a win against Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, and the Patriots for the franchise's first Super Bowl. With the benefit of hindsight, of course, it probably would have been better to get rid of Nick Foles right away, because that's a factor in all of this, John, in my mind, because that dynamic the following season is awkward, and you still had a big portion of the fan base saying maybe Nick Foles should be the starter. As idiotic as that is, that was a factor in the problem. That's how I look at it.
Well, I do think it was a factor in Carson Wentz's inability to get over it, but I kind of blame that. Nick is. I had no problem with the Eagles bringing him back for 2 reasons. One, remember, Carson wasn't healthy at the beginning of 2018. He was coming off not only a torn ACL, torn LCL. Nick started, I think, the first 2 games that year, and by the way, played extremely poorly. So Carson wasn't even ready to go week 1. And then when he was healthy, he was given the reins back, as he should have been. But also because of the way Nick is. I mean, he's not going to make waves. It's not, we talk about quarterback controversies. That one was truly manifested only by the fans. The organization never wavered. It was never, is Nick possibly better than Carson? No, they never even played into that for 10 seconds. So while I do believe it was a Carson Wentz psyche thing, I don't think it was an organizational mishap because they needed a backup quarterback. He wasn't healthy. And Nick's a guy who's not going to make waves. He just isn't.
3 years to the day, Eagles, Doug Peterson, and Nick Foles, world champions, Super Bowl winners over the Patriots. And what we're talking about now and the state of this organization is certainly appalling, as John McMullen put it. John, we'll wrap up the week tomorrow right here on The Fix at 7:30. Follow John, like I said, at JF McMullen. All right, John, we'll do it again tomorrow.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Little mini rant for you. Probably not as good as yours, but
no.
Mini rant.
We'll take the mini rants. All right, there he is, J-Mac. It's amazing, man. It's absolutely amazing and appalling, whatever word you want to use. And John, I bring up the Nick Foles, Carson Wentz dynamic, and John says, a couple things. Carson Wentz was hurt. He didn't start to open the season because of the injury. And Nick Foles and how good of a guy he is and how great of a teammate he is. And I'm not disputing any of that, but it's just the circumstance and what just those two guys being in the room together, being on the same team after what took place was a recipe for failure, a recipe for disaster. And I will admit, it is easier to say that now, but I was saying it, you can check the tape, I was saying it back then too, and a lot of people were. I felt Carson Wentz should be the starter. Carson's the better quarterback, at least at the time. But that was a big piece of this puzzle in Carson Wentz's psyche, his confidence, the perception of him as a player, a teammate, a person, a leader. And here we are. Crazy. All right, 1 hour down just like that. When we come back, Ben Fawkes, VP of Digital Content for the VEASAN squad. He'll join us next to talk Super Bowl best bets and much more. Keep it locked in right here. A good conversation on deck.